Hey, you guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. So I'm really excited for what we're going to talk about today. This is something that can be really heavy, but I think it's also really important for us to know about as we are deepening on our expression and our power and our sovereignty and we're all feeling the awakening of the feminine. This is a topic that is so directly connected that I feel like we really have to look at it. And it's a subject of witchcraft and what happened to all of these women who were burned at the stake, who were drowned, who were hung over the last 1,000 years. And this is a topic that we've been told so little about, especially if you live in the US. Like we all know in our school system in the US, we don't learn very much about other countries. So when I thought about witches, I thought about the Salem Witch Trials. And that was kind of it. Like I never had really learned about the Inquisition, or I guess maybe I just didn't pay attention. But it's really interesting because I started studying first the Salem Witch Trials because I was like, there's something here that we're not being told. There's more here. So I started studying it and I found a whole rabbit hole of historical events that occurred in Europe that I had never heard of. And I'm like, why is this not common knowledge? So I'm going to share here some of the things that I've learned. Hey you guys, I'm coming to you from another time with shorter hair. And I want to just I'm going to be adding in a few things throughout this presentation. I filmed this last year and there's so much good information that I wanted to keep a lot of it here. But I want to just let you know, the witch is one of the archetypes that I work with most of my clients on in some capacity in our work, because what I'm going to tell you in this video, you're going to understand why you might be afraid to speak your truth, why you might be afraid to utilize your gifts in public, why you might be afraid to express yourself in certain ways, because a lot of times our subconscious or our soul might even have imprints. There might be other lifetimes where you were connected to this sort of thing. Even if you weren't executed as a witch, you could have been someone who watched 10 witches hang in the town square, right? And that impacted you. So this work runs really deep, and learning how to embody the witch archetype is really how we counteract the witch wound. And this can start out with just learning to speak your truth, doing it in small ways, right? One step at a time, but also learning the different pathways of the witch and all the different ways that she works, all of the different ways that she works magic. This is the perfect way to counteract the witch wound and to kind of go against the patriarchy and come back into our deep feminine power. And so if you want support with that, I'm really excited. I'm going to be doing a 7-week experience that's very affordable. I want everybody to be able to access this. We're going to be doing it live. Afterwards, it will be available self-study if you want to do it that way. But we're going to go into 5 different faces of the dark feminine. The dark feminine is not the shadow feminine. She's not wounded. She is simply the part of us that's been suppressed through things like what I'm going to show you in this video about what happened to witches. So the witch is the first archetype that we're going to be looking at. And I'm not going to be going into this sort of detail. This will be included in that course just as like an FYI if you want to know what happened to witches. But we're going to be doing more embodiment work and learning the pathways of the witches and a lot of other beautiful, juicy things. So I'll put the link in the comments if you want to check that out, or just watch this video and enjoy it and give me a thumbs up on YouTube. I would appreciate that. So I'll let you continue on to the video, but just know that that's there for you if you do want to go deeper into this material. Where do I start? Okay, so let's start actually with the Salem Witch Trials. So the Salem Witch Trials actually started from a few like small girls, a few like young teenagers. And in this time, America was just forming. There was a lot of the people in that space were Puritan, and there was a lot of superstition and fear. And at the same time period, there was like warring going on with Native Americans. They were like fighting each other for obvious reasons because you're taking my land. And so there was a lot of fear going on because there were a lot of things that were unknown and out of control. And so this small group of children, basically, who are girls, essentially started faking that they were being attacked by different spirits and would start naming different women who were usually like old and feeble and kind of defenseless. They would start naming these women as witches. And like the hysteria was so palpable that adults were believing what was going on. And there's like a lot you can look at within that around hypnosis and around other things. Um, but it's like wild, the sort of things that were occurring. And these women were, a lot of them died during torture. So here's what would happen if someone was named a witch. And this would go back to around the 1200s when this sort of thing started happening. So we're actually going to go way back. We'll come back to Salem. So around the 1200s, 1300s, the church was starting to lose power. And the church had basically, over the last 1,000 years, from 350 AD-ish to 1300 AD, they had essentially brought shame into the public experience. They had really created all of this narrative that we're born sinners, that women are the early church's views on women were horrific. And you can see this in the Bible and how it was written. Like, anyways, I'm not going to go there. Their views on women were basically that women were created to be enticers for men to go off of the spiritual path, that the only purpose was continuing like humanity, birthing children. And even that was a sin because the woman was so unholy and basically demonic that anything that would come from her would be so horrible that it would have to spend its whole life repenting. That's literally the origin of "you're born a sinner. We have to be good Christians or whatever so that we can be redeemed after in the heavenly realm after life." Basically all of the feminine tradition, like earth worship, goddess worship, we're just working with the cycles of the earth, had really been eradicated for the most part, but it was still being passed down in some cases through generational lines. So like mother would teach her daughter how to use herbs to heal, or mother would teach her daughter to do certain things based on their gifts. And so a lot of things were happening at this period of time. The church started using the word heresy, which basically was a blanket statement for anything that went against the beliefs of the church. So they would start calling people heretics who were political threats, who were going against church publicly or like embarrassing the church, people who were gay. Witches fit into this. I forget the year, but at a certain point in time, witchcraft became a part of heresy so that they could actually be tried in the same way. So, and I believe that was through being burnt at the stake. The church at this time was kind of like freaking out, like we're about to lose power. We need to do anything to gain control again. So they started calling a bunch of people heretics, burning them at the stake, or killing them in some way. And around the same time, there was a lot of fear about the devil. There was a lot of, because there had been all this programming about like, essentially that what the church did with their teachings was remove parts of our cyclical nature. So the underworld aspect that was a vital part of the cycle of the goddess. So the goddess was seen in all aspects of her nature, not just the heavenly ones, not just the angelic ones. And they just cast all of those away as being demonic. So anything around like rage and anger, anything around sexuality, anything around, like for women particularly, aspects of a woman that are hard to control or hard to, like, that you wouldn't ever be able to control or take power of, were labeled as demonic. And all of this fear was brought in around these demonic realms, around hell, around the devil itself, literally to program people to be submissive, to program people to completely annihilate aspects of ourself. And there have been massive consequences for this. When you actually do research about the Inquisition and about the witch hunts, most of it was actually centered around like devil stuff, around fear on the devil, around worshiping the devil. I want to just start with this. Actually, this is the best point to start. So in the late 1400s, there was a book that was written called The Hammer of the Witches. Two men wrote it, and it basically was a manual for hunting witches. And so the first part was about how like distorted witches were and how depraved they were and how messed up they were, and all of like really kind of like a pep talk on like, here's why we should go after this group of people. The next part was the things that witches would do. So this was, they would say like riding on broomsticks and like worshiping the devil and all these different things that are actually, like, if you look at it today, very silly, like very just like, really, you guys thought that? The third part was about how to prosecute witches. And this happened all across Europe. Germany and Scotland were actually two of the most brutal spaces. So, and across Europe, the laws would be different based on each country. So in some places, burning wasn't allowed. And under British law, burning wasn't allowed. So here in the US, there were never witch burnings unless it was like under the radar. There were more hangings and drownings and killings by torture. In other countries, there was a lot of burning. So especially France. So just a side note, like as you're listening to this, note the countries that you have biological origin with, that your bloodline is from. Note where you feel drawn to, or maybe there's even some countries that you want nothing to do with. Notice your relationship to certain countries and how you feel about them, because a lot of times when we have things that we have strong opinions towards, but there's kind of no reason why, that's stemming from other lifetimes. So, yeah, in each country, the rules would be different. But in general, the Hammer of the Witches book was read in a lot of different countries. And basically, witch hunters started to become popular, and they would be highly paid. So they would go to different villages, to different towns, and like look for witches, because they would be paid for finding witches and turning them into the government. And in many cases, these witch hunters actually would be the ones like conducting the trials. They would go to a judge, but they would sort of be the ones in charge of proving that someone was a witch. So that if you just think about that for a second, it's like so unethical. Of course, someone who's being paid to find witches is going to try to get as many witches as they possibly can. So there were so many things that could label someone as a witch to have the witch hunter find them to begin with. First of all, like being overtly sexual, showing too much of your skin, having long hair. Like I sort of fit all of the check marks. If you had moles on your body that were visible, they would call these like devil's marks, and we'll go more into that in a second. If literally anyone said that you were a witch, it doesn't matter. So if you were like dating somebody and this could be different during the time, but if you were dating somebody and they were like, she's a witch, you're about to be prosecuted. So there was no like real justice system occurring with this. It was just gossip. And then other people would name you a witch because they were forced to during torture. So we'll get to that in a minute too. So that's how, there's so many other ways too, but that's just like a gist of how someone could be labeled as a witch. Also, if they were seen like underneath the moonlight, if they were seen doing some sort of ceremony. And also, just an FYI, this is interesting. A lot of the words that have been used different ways have been distorted. So the word sin actually means a moon worshiper. It means a priestess of the goddess. It means someone devoted to the goddess. So these things are all just interesting to note how they have been changed over time. So now we all know what the word sin means. That's probably the most widely understood word on the planet. So if a woman was seen with a group of other women doing something like dancing or drinking herbal tea together, they could be called a witch. If a woman had a miscarriage, if she was raped, she could be called a witch. Like crazy things. So basically anything you could be called a witch for. So we can see today how this would impact our self-expression, how this would make us scared to show aspects of ourselves that we think might not be deemed suitable or okay. all of this still lives in us so deeply. So, okay, back to okay. So you could be labeled a witch for all those things. They would go to suspects' houses and look around the house. And this specific pair who wrote the Hammer of the Witches book were actually found out later. They were hiring people, sometimes children, sometimes older women, to go hide in spaces and make like weird noises. So it would sound like the devil was in the person's space. They, of course, nothing really happened to them. They got like a slap on the wrist about it and were still able to do their job. So they had all these people prosecuted, got caught doing that, and nothing happened to them, yet all these women are killed. This period of time from 1300 to 1800 about has been called the woman's Holocaust. And this is just like blows my mind. Like, why have we not heard that term? Why have we not learned about that? And the reason that it's called this is because the number of women estimated to die is around 11 million, which is more than the Holocaust. This wasn't that long ago, less than 1,000 years ago. In one of the books I was reading about this, they were saying 400 years ago, people were being burned at the stake every single day. That's not very long. So once a witch was brought into custody, she would be put usually in horrible conditions in a jail cell, barely fed. They would strip them naked, sometimes publicly. Probably if you were lucky, it would be public. They would strip you naked. They would shave your whole body, including your hair, and they would look for what they called devil's marks. So this would essentially, what they would do is they had one of the torture tools was a pricker, and basically it was like something sharp, and they would put it all over your body to see the spaces that you wouldn't bleed. So you would be bleeding all over your body, and they would be finding like one space that wouldn't bleed, and that would be the proof that you were a witch. This was one of the like entry things that they would do when they brought you in. And this was also found out later that a lot of them were using these knives that were retractable. So then they'd poke you all over and you'd bleed, and then they would find a space where you didn't bleed because they pulled the blade back. For women, most of the time, can you guess where these spaces were? They were around the private parts, if you will, around the anus, around the groin, around your breasts. Interesting. For men, they would be typically like on your armpit, on the lips and mouth, and on the anus. Like, ow, first of all. So that was one of the first things that they would do. The methods of torture would differ by country. So this part is probably going to be kind of hard to hear, but this is, I think, where a lot of the fear is imprinted based on what would physically happen to us. And if it didn't happen to you or like an ancestor or someone that you knew in other lifetimes, you would have seen people publicly experiencing this. So like everybody in that time period was touched by this. Doesn't matter if you were a witch or not. So they would keep you in jail, sometimes for years. They would keep you in jail until your trial date. And these witch hunters would try to force confessions out of you. So the torture methods were horrifying. And basically, if you confessed, you were seen like you would get in trouble, but you wouldn't die usually. Sometimes you still would, though. If you wouldn't confess, you were for sure a witch. And this is like what their mindset was. So if you wouldn't confess, they would torture you until you would. They would torture you until you would name your neighbor, your mom, your sister, your daughter. And most people would get to the point of naming multiple people because they would be put to such extreme pain. The things that they did, like I saw this meme the other day or post or something that was like, why have we been raised to fear witches and not the people who were burning them at the stake? AKA the church. Why did the church get away with all of this? And still today, it's not brought up. I just know for me, I have spoken about the church, and because I do all this research, it's impossible to overlook the church's extreme involvement in all of this. And it is scary. The first few times I made videos about this publicly, full body sweating. I was so afraid of what was going to happen because the programming of this is so deep. And it's still, even if your family is not religious, it is still like in our belief system so deeply because it was so strong for like 1600 years. Really, it's the last 50 years that the church has started to lose a lot of its power. And that still lives through us so strongly. And so it's important for us to actually know what happens so we can like interrupt that programming and also just see how it's impacting us today, even if we don't understand why. So the torture methods would differ. By the way, you would also pay for your own torture. So if you were called a witch, you would have to pay for literally the people to take you from your house to the jail cell. You would pay for your food. You would pay for, like, everything would come out of your earnings, your property. Even your burning at the stake, you would have to pay for. You'd be billed for it. Insane. And then the church would actually get your property. It wouldn't go to your children. It wouldn't go to your family. It would go to the church. So the sort of torture that happened so to get someone to confess was so unethical and also just extremely barbaric. So I actually have like a little list here I'm going to read from because there's no way I can remember all of these. So let me just find it. I have like 1,000 notes for this that I actually haven't even been using. Okay. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. Okay. Weights could be placed on your body. So think about like 60-pound weights or 200-pound weights on your body. We already talked about the devil's mark pricking, extreme squeezing of your limbs, putting the soles of your feet in fire. They would cover your feet in fat, set them in front of a fire, and then allow your feet to roast. While all this was happening, they would be asking you questions and also putting information in your mouth, putting information in, like today, this would be so illegal. Cutting off of your fingers and or toes, making you swallow oil and vinegar. This was a common one. It's called the strapado. I think that's how you say it. They would bind your arms, put your arms behind you, connect your feet together with rope. They would attach you to a pulley and drop you until you were 1 foot off of the floor over and over and over. This would really be harmful to your joints. And at some points that would completely you would be disjointed. So they would start with that. And then in other places, it was called squazation. And they would do that, but they would tie to your feet 40 to 220-pound weights. This part I got from a book. 40 to 220 pounds underneath your feet. They would attach to your ankles. Then they would drop you. So your limbs would literally come off. And they knew that if they did squazation specifically, you would die after they couldn't do it more than twice because you would die. So, but that was a common torture method. And also, just to pause in that, literally their thought process was that they were saving your soul. And so someone could have been praising God. Like, this is actually something that's been recorded in a lot of documents. People would be like calling upon Jesus, calling upon Mother Mary, calling upon different saints as this is happening. And they were like, oh, they're definitely the devil, because you have to actually be more afraid of the devil that masks himself as holy or masks himself as a devout worshiper. It's just like, what? Like, okay. So another thing that would happen is drowning. And this actually happened where I grew up. There was this road. I grew up in Virginia Beach, and there's this road called Witch Duck Road. And one of the only cases actually that's recorded, at least in Virginia, was this woman. I can't remember what her name is, Grace something. And what they would do with the drowning is they would take you on a boat, and they would tie your arms behind your back, and they would tie your ankles and your feet together there was like a binder on the big toe. There would also be a rope around your waist, your hips, that would be attached to a longer rope that someone would be holding up on the boat. So they would push you into the water. And so there'd be a rope coming up from your body up to like a soldier per se, like someone who works for the church. And that's a lot to say in one sentence, but accurate. The person on the boat would be holding this. And so they would say, if the person drowned, they were innocent. If they floated, aka if the person pulled the rope up, they were guilty and then they would be prosecuted. So there was so much fraudulence to all of this. Like, why would you have someone holding the thing if they were to prove it themselves? Anyways, so where I grew up, this happened and I looked it up. And that happened to the woman. She didn't drown and she was proven guilty. And it wasn't always that people would be killed. Sometimes they would just have to spend a certain amount of time in jail. This would depend on what country you were in. But a lot of times people would just die in jail because the conditions were so filthy and so bad. And if you think about places like England or Scotland or like more northern countries where it's freezing and they would be in dungeons, like stone dungeons with no fresh air, there's like mold growing in there. A lot of them would die in those spaces. So yeah, so that was another method of torture. They could stretch you on a rack, needles under the fingernails. That's still done today. There was something called the Iron Witch's Chair, and they would tie you to this chair and roast you. They would slowly roast you, not like on Comedy Central. Like literally with fire, they would roast you. Not funny, but I just had to make a joke to lighten it up a little. Burning feathers dipped in sulfur. They would put this under your armpits and on your groin. This one's disgusting. Quartering by horses. We're going to go to the next. Water torture, where they would have a cloth over your mouth and they would pour water in and you would be laying down strapped to a table. Flogging. And then also, I just want to say, like, public mass executions like that. This is like, there should be war crimes for this shit, even like hundreds of years later. There should be war crimes for the leaders who allowed this to happen. So if you can imagine, like I was saying before, even if you weren't the one being burnt at the stake or hung in front of your whole town, which, like, number one, humiliating. Number two, just like the amount of impact that's going to have on you for so many lifetimes. But even if you were someone in the crowd, think about it. Like, these towns weren't huge at this time period. So if there was a town of 2,000 people, you would know most people and you would know the people who are being hung. It's like if you had an elementary school teacher that your kids had them, all your kids had them as a teacher, and then you watch them be hung. Like, all these people that you know, the amount of fear spread through that. And this was like also part of it. The church actually wanted, this is my interpretation, the church actually wanted there to be mass fear so that people would be afraid to go against the church. So, and this was the same with with people labeled as heretics. So also during the torture, something that they would force people to do is name other witches, other people that were doing these acts with them, other people that were going to their sabbats, like, which basically were seen as devil worshiping ceremonies, but they were just like moon ceremonies. They were just working with the earth cycles and honoring Mother Nature for the most part. And they would make up these stories about, like, there being extreme devil worship and sacrifice. Meanwhile, like, look at what they're doing to these people. And in different towns and stuff, in certain different towns, they started saying, like, you're killing all of our women. We're not going to have any women left. Like, you guys have to leave. These witch hunters have to leave because you're taking all of our women. What are we supposed to do with no women? And in some cases, literally the numbers would be like a third of the town would be labeled as a witch and put in jail. So eventually, like towards the 1700s and late 1600s, in a lot of different countries, it was sort of like people were tired of it, and people were not open to it and sort of seeing the fallacy and starting, or if they weren't, it doesn't feel like they were really seeing it, but they were starting to just feel like this isn't helpful. Like, this, we're not going to do this anymore. But the witch hunters like fought because this was their livelihood, and it spread the whole globe because Christianity spread the whole globe. So it's just really heavy. And we can think about today how this is still impacting us, how this is hurting us so deeply. through our fear of expressing ourselves, through our fear of our intuition, through fear about what other people will think. Something too that I think is so common right now that's occurring with this is judgment about other women who are coming into their femininity, or the opposite, judgment of lack of femininity in people, judgment towards sisters. And most of us have heard the term the sister wound. That came from other people labeling you as a witch that were once your friends, or literally your siblings or neighbors, or even like they would have children name their parents. Children also burned at the stake too. I also just want to read you, I wrote this down because it was just kind of like funny to me, but also not funny. So this was the mindset of the times. So I believe this was in England. After issuing 40 warrants, Justice Dudley refused to sign anymore. This made him seen as a witch. He was indicted for 9 murders and fled. His brother was also indicted for inciting his dog to afflict pain, like on other people. The dog was tried and hung as a witch. When I read that, I was just like, what the fuck? So there was so much fear created. In Germany, it was estimated to have 100,000 people burnt in Germany alone. And something that they specifically did in Germany, this was said to be the most brutal of places. And interesting that the Holocaust, of course, is originating there. They would roast women in ovens. 1,000 women died that way. And there were also children included in that. So can you see the, like, how programmed and how brainwashed do you have to be saying like, this person is of the devil, I must roast them to death so that they die, and not see yourself as being any part of that, but seeing that person as like, oh, they're the evil one. And ultimately what was happening here on a larger level is that the church had pretty much eradicated the public goddess worship, which took a long time to do. Actually, this took centuries for the temples to be burnt, for the temples to be destroyed, to stop active worship of the goddess. Like, this took centuries. And so people had to be really private about it. People had to be secretive about it, but it was still being passed down. It was still happening. It was still living so strongly that women were teaching their daughters and teaching their family certain things, but it was confined to the home. And so on a much bigger scale, now we don't have that for the vast majority. Unless maybe you came as an immigrant or your family came from another country to the US or to Europe, we don't have that lineage anymore because it was burnt out literally through witches. Anyone who was practicing it was either killed, or they became so scared to talk about any of this stuff with their children. Like, I'm not even going to tell my daughter about the moon, because if she's seen working with it, or if she accidentally tells somebody who then goes tell an authority, she might be thrown in jail and murdered. So, ugh. So the generational passing down of this information was eradicated. Hey, it's me again, just with a brief interruption. So I also want to let you know, you guys have now heard some of the things that happened that were just really brutal. And like I said, a lot of these things are still affecting us from past lives where this happened. And I do this work with clients all the time. And one of the things that I'm offering now as sort of a very specific focus for my Akashic record readings is to look specifically at your dark feminine energy, looking at like what amount of that is expressed, what amount of that are you still suppressing, and where would your guides have you deepen, and that's going to give you specific detail on perhaps past lives that there might still be, like, your soul might still be closed off, or there might be aspects of your soul that have been left in these lifetimes that are not allowing you to utilize certain things. This is sometimes called a soul retrieval. Do this all the time in my readings with people. And also just opportunities to deepen. And the guides are always really specific with this. You're going to get tangible support and tangible advice, as well as there might be energetic activations, there might be DNA activations. But I think that this is just going to be really, really helpful for those of you who are like, I want to deepen into it, where do I start? Or you just have a desire to know more about the specifics. So I'm going to put the link for that in the comments as well. If you want to purchase that, you can purchase it separately of the course, which is called The Realm of the Dark Feminine, or you can purchase it alongside the course, whatever you desire. So that's there if you want to look at any of your past lives that might be, you might be holding some trauma in that are still affecting you today. Because the thing is, all of our past lives are happening parallel. They're not like, oh, they're over and done with. Every time is not linear. Everything's happening in a parallel reality. So it's kind of all happening right now. It's a little, maybe there's another video about that later, but I just want to offer that if you do desire support with that specifically, or with work around the witch wound specifically. Okay, on to the rest of the video. I often think about, with my own gifts, how would things have been different for me if I had had, like, no offense, mom, if I had had someone teaching me how to use my gifts, if I had had someone from an early age teaching me about my menstrual cycle, about the sacred relationship of that, and not just like, here's a tampon, it's okay. Like, you know, how would things be different? But we were robbed of that because of these actions of these people during these centuries. And if you live in, especially more like indigenous cultures, you still have some of that lineage. Oh, there's so much I want to say here. And I think something that is vitally important to understand with all of this is the feminine aspects that we experience collectively have been hand molded by the church, by the patriarchy, because they're one and the same. And the parts of women that were hard to control, that were wild, that are like untamable, labeled as demonic. There are certain aspects that are portrayed as being acceptable as a woman in our collective. This is outside of the church now, it's in our collective. And there are other things that we're starting to bring back. And as we're doing that, it's ruffling feathers. It's ruffling feathers. So I want you to just tune in and think for yourself. What has your experience been in seeing other women portraying their sexuality, and seeing other women who are deeply feminine, and seeing other women working with magic, and seeing other women using their gifts in different ways? Because a lot of times we can have a lot of judgment towards it, or like fear around it, or like, that's so cool she's doing that, but like, I couldn't do it. But there also can be this fear attached to it, because it's like, that is death. Back then, like, if I was wearing this down the street, which you know, acting in certain ways literally wouldn't be safe. So there's a lot of stuff for us that comes up around this, around safety. I would say 90% of it is, if not more, is rooted in safety. Is it safe for you to showcase yourself? Is it safe for you to tell people about your visions, or about your dreams, or about your gifts? Is it safe for you to be seen fully as you are? And what essentially happened as a result of all of this is we became afraid of showcasing certain things, because we would die for it. And so we learned this as a collective. Okay, if I do this, I'm going to be deemed as a witch and burnt, or hung, or tortured to death. So I can't do that. I have to fit the mold. I have to fit in this little nice convenient box. So in this aspect of putting ourselves in a box, this is related to the entire dark feminine. This is not just related to the witch archetype. This applies most, I would say, to the witch and the wild woman, because the wild woman, the primal woman, who the witch can definitely have aspects of that for sure, but she is really the one who's just like gives no fucks. Like, she does not care what will, like, she's gonna be untamed, she's gonna be herself. And I want you to just sit and feel into your own heart, your own feminine energy, and look at, just, you know what, go ahead and close your eyes and just look at, take a deep breath for a moment and just feel into, what is the size of the cage that my feminine is in? And can you see parts of your dark feminine energy, that wild woman, the seductress, the primal parts of you, the part of you that speaks freely and fully? How much of her is locked behind a cage? How much of her is stifled in this space, and how is she responding to being in that cage? Is she like wilding out? Is she rattling the cages? Is she just kind of calm and sitting there and she's like, just giving up? What is she doing in there? And you can even imagine putting a key in the lock and just opening that lock just a little bit. You can open it all the way. You can imagine just dissolving the bars of that prison, whatever you desire. And then go ahead and open your eyes again. You can also just leave her exactly as she is. There's no right answer. But the dark feminine this is not the shadow aspects of us. It's not the wounded aspect of us like we've been taught, because we've been taught that this aspect of us is demonic. That's literally exactly what the church taught 1,000 years ago. And this is not the same church we're talking about today. You have to remember, and this is something I didn't realize until I did an enormous amount of research. The church was the government. There was no separation. That's why in the United States today, we have a separation of church and state, right? So there really wasn't a difference between the church and leadership during those times. They were one and the same. So they had an enormous amount of power. And you also just, you think about even in the 1800s, you think about the amount of like how pious women might have been, or how like, oh, you don't speak unless you're talked to, you don't speak out of turn, you never like backtalk your husband, which like isn't something we should really be doing, but you know what I mean? Like the consequences for being an individual, unique woman were great. And all of that was so much worse 1,000 years ago. So that's where the root of all of this is. And we have to remember that this aspect of ourselves, our dark feminine, and I wish that there was another word for us to call it. I like to call it actually like our potent, our wild, our free feminine. She is holy too. She is so holy, and you don't need to hide her. The only caveat I would say is we do have to learn how to work with her, because we've never learned how to work with her. Our mothers didn't teach us, because we haven't learned anything about so much of the different aspects of ourself, or how to use magic or things like that from our ancestors, because it wasn't safe. So for example, when you're learning how to work with a seductress, you could potentially go into the shadow aspects of the seductress, which can be more of like the femme fatale energy, where she's hurting men. That's what a femme fatale is. It's like she's so seductive and she destroys every man she comes across. That's what the femme fatale represents, right? That's a shadow aspect. That's not the feminine in her highest, because the feminine in her highest is is working using her energy and her sexual essence in a way that is of the highest good for all, including herself, right? So we have to learn how to work with these, because they are more powerful, I would say, than our light aspects. They can do more damage, is a way you could say it. And you could think of it this way. Like, I work with dragons all the time. I also have a dragon Akashic activation if you want to learn more about that. But dragons, you think about, the fire breathing dragons, or just fire itself. Fire could burn down an entire village if you don't know, like, oh, fire catches. You can't like, it has to be contained, right? But it also is life-giving. And with the dragon example, it's like dragons are the same. Like these fiery dragons, if they were operating out of a space of real woundedness or extreme rage or anger, this could also go with some of the destructive goddesses. We're going to link all of those energies in this course that I'm offering, the 7-week experience, the realm of the dark feminine. If they're operating from a space that is out of balance, they can do extreme damage. But the dragons who are in like the ethers, that are, more in, you could call this like the angelic realm or the heavenly realm, that are operating in a much higher dimension, like they don't have as much capacity, like they're not going to destroy anything. You can't really misuse that energy. And it's sort of like our light and love energy and the really sweet aspects of us, and, the really loving and compassionate, like you can't really do a lot of damage with those, right? These darker aspects, we have to learn how to embody. And so this is one of the things I'm going to be teaching in this experience is I've been doing this work for years and have been studying this deeply in my own initiatory process with myself and with so many different clients over the last 7 years. We're going to look at the shadow aspects and how to balance those, because a lot of times when this part of you comes out of that cage, like you can imagine a tiger breaking out of a zoo for the first time. There might be some rage there. There's gonna be rage, actually. There's gonna be rage. There's gonna be anger. They might be a little gnarly, right? So it's helpful to have support in that process. And so I'm also gonna say, if you're watching this and you're like, look, I need intensive help, like not really, that's not the right way to say it. Like, I really desire close support with this, and I want a more private experience of this. I have a whole mentorship experience called the temples. And the Temple of a Dark Goddess, I have 2 of them, the Temple of Sekhmet and the Temple of Lilith. And I'm also advertising that with this course, because if you want to go deeper and work with me for 8 weeks one-on-one, first of all, you're going to get the 7-week experience for free. Which is I'm only offering that as we're doing it live the month of October 2023. So if you're watching this later, that won't apply. But you can come in and work with me in a deeper capacity where we're doing this work and I can really hold you in it, and we can look at the specific things that are coming up for you. Whereas the Realm of the Dark Feminine, which is the 7-week experience, is a group experience. So we're not going to be going into your personal stuff. It's more of a teaching and embodiment experience, unless you book an Akashic reading with me. So there's a wide variety of ways I can help you with this, because this really is very sensitive. It really is very delicate and sort of like fragile. So if you feel like you need extra support, like trust that, especially if you've had a lot of trauma, if you've experienced a lot of issues with your sexuality or with expression, all of that sort of stuff, I can absolutely hold you in. So, okay, we'll go back to the rest of the programming, but I wanted to add that in about the entirety of the dark feminine being in that cage, and how can we release her, because she is holy and she deserves to be free. And she's an aspect of you that should not be hidden or suppressed. So if you're scared that someone's going to judge you, let that be your initiation. Do it anyways. Find a way to do it that your nervous system isn't going to like have a full blowout panic attack. Inch your way towards it, but don't hide from it, because for me, I think of it as like the oppressors are winning when I do that. Like, if you have something to say, it is because someone needs it. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a joke, if it's a teaching, if it's a meditation, whatever it might be, if it's like a random thought, it will probably help somebody, even if you never know about it. So really like getting deep with yourself and asking, like, what am I here to do? And where am I stifling myself? Where am I not free? Where am I not in my wild? Where am I containing myself still? Okay, so that is a great place to close off with this particular transmission. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, let me know your thoughts. That all helps more people find this video. And I truly just was so fascinated when I learned about so much of this, because I kind of, with witches, I just knew about like a little bit about the Salem Witch Trials, but I had no idea that it was such a long thing that went on in Europe, and I just had no idea about so much of it. So if you enjoyed it, please let me know. Leave a comment, like I said, or give the video a thumbs up. And if you want to go deeper, like I said, there are 3 different ways you can go deeper into this work with me. So the first way, I'm doing a live 7-week experience called the Realm of the Dark Feminine. We're starting October 29th, and it will be a self-study experience after that. But I would join live if you're watching this while it's still live, 2023, if you're able to, because that way you just get a little bit more juice, right? But we're going to be looking at the 5 different archetypes of the dark feminine. We're going to have an opening ceremony and a closing ceremony, and it's going to be phenomenal. I can't wait. The second option is to do a dark feminine Akashic Records reading with me, where we're really going to focus on what is being asked of, like, what is your feminine energy asking of you? What needs to be freed? What are the blocks that are still, maybe there's like a block in front of that door that your feminine is, in the cage, and there's a big rock in front of it stopping her from coming out. We're going to look at all that stuff. So energetically, we can kind of see, How can we free that aspect of you more? And is there anything tangible that needs to be done or is being offered to be done in order to do that? And then the third is that times 8. So that's the temple of the dark feminine. Depending on what you're working with, you would either go into the temple of Sekhmet or the temple of Lilith. And it doesn't really matter. Like, they're the same price point when you're buying it. And we will just, in my mind, it's like we're going into the temple of the dark feminine, and whoever needs to flow in or out is perfect. And I create a customized experience for you each week for 8 weeks. And like I said, during the month of October 2023, if you join that temple, you're going to get the 7-week experience for free. So that can just support you in having more information and more embodiment practices to support with that. But the temple is really where you're going to get that private work. The other stuff is the 7-week experience is also great because you're going to be with other women who are deepening into this. And so their experiences, their shares are also going to support you in embodying that. And who knows, you could meet your best friend. I've met so many of my best friends, actually, like maybe all of them now, from being in group experiences like this. I'm not like promising that, it's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility, right? This is where we meet people who are like-minded and who are doing the same type of work. So I'll put the links for all 3 of those different things in the comments below and in the description if you want to check those out. And if not, just thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you loved it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it entertained you and gave you some information that supports you in your spiritual journey. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can always visit alliewilkins.com to see any future offerings I have or any cool stuff I'm doing. And I will see you next week. Bye.